Okay, so here we are. We're going to be talking about leadership priorities for the fall, which we've been doing a lot of that lately, right, Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And this is actually really exciting because the Horizon Room is one of those new types of places where we can just have an informal conversation and learn from others, and that's really good. I think that's going to be exciting. It's an exciting thing.
Yeah. So we'll unmic people or open their mic if they want us to, so they can just join the conversation. But let's start first with the fact that there even has to be right now a step for prioritization, right? So it's only when you're getting pelted from every direction and you can't manage it all that you have to prioritize. And so let's just start with what is the post-pandemic world going into this fall. So many things to talk about, but I want to start with the teacher shortage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a number here that we've enumerated that we're talking about, and there's others, right? I mean, the top three are really significant. And later in our conversation today, we're going to look at some more data and some of the research that we've got to share around some of these critical trends and pressures. And it really is daunting, right? And so to have the conversation, to help folks work through, that's really what this is, and it's that kind of a space. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I think just looking at the headlines that I've been looking at, being a news hub, we look at all the things happening. Can you go back?
Yep.
I kind of want to stay there for a second.
Yeah.
You've got places like the superintendent in Los Angeles giving advanced warning. It's going to get worse. They've gone from like 730,000 students down to 420,000. New York City lost over 50,000. The attrition of students away is just massive all across the country. And meanwhile, places like California launched an initiative to fund 630 community schools. Alabama just opened a whole bunch of charters. Florida is like a boomtown for new small schools. It's happening everywhere. So if you step back and look at the whole national map, it's not you're losing students. It's that the market just fractured into a million little bits, like you broke a glass, right? Or you broke a mirror and it just, it's down a little tiny pieces now all over the floor. That's kind of what is happening. And it might not feel that way in some parts of the country. But if you step away and look at it over the last 3 years, it's really a massive shift.
For sure. And I think it's a great point to make that it is much more complex, like you said, than just losing kids, right? Because this is all tied to funding. And we've been watching those trends where people are leaving the public school system, looking for the alternatives, looking for the private institutions and a different type of experience. And what that's doing to our public schools is taking cash away. So if we have a staffing issue now, wait till those funds start to go elsewhere. Then what are we doing, right? Then we're closing schools. We're laying off staff. That's bananas. How do we continue to improve and provide services for students if we can't manage that stuff effectively?
Yeah. And let's talk about that teacher attrition right now in terms of priorities, or teacher not having enough teachers. I've found one article that actually said there's no real teacher shortage. You're fine. In the meantime, I've had more phone calls with districts indicating that they have this massive problem and can't rectify it. States, I think it was New Mexico. Was it New Mexico or Arizona? I can't remember now. Is brought in the military. It was New Mexico, right? And
Yes.
Florida is now allowing any veteran to apply for credentialing. So there's a lot of extraordinary solutions being offered, as well as, districts talking about importing teachers from India and other places because they literally can't get them. So the data is the data, right? Like you can't get the teachers. And we've been telling people now for a little while, as you know, Chris, you won't get them. You think you can get them, but you will not get them, and you will be short. So that leads us sort of towards like the priorities conversation. What are you going to do about that? At the same time, you're sort of toggling with, you've lost a lot of students and you've also lost a lot of teachers. And now don't even have enough teachers for what you have left for students.
Right.
And if they're seduced by the idea of going to a hybrid type environment, a different structure where they're not more than sort of online, but also interacting with students in a physical environment, once in a while in a new logistical sort of featured arena, they might be willing to go do that, right? In large numbers. And so all those new realities are coming apart. And it makes me feel like we're talking about the turn of the century that happened from the agricultural age to the industrial age. There was a massive move and shift of people, out of farming communities into big cities and the manufacturing, and then sort of took off for like 100 years. And then there was the tech shift that did this sort of a little bit of the same thing, but we're now in something in education we haven't seen ever before. Whereas there was like a little parts of online learning and a bunch of apps roaming the horizon, but now we're looking at a true structural shift. And I think that's going to be sort of part of the first priority we want to talk about. I see, Ellen, you're on. Feel free to jump in, because this whole conversation is supposed to be sort of open mic. And you've heard us talking now about some of the biggest pressures. Do you want to weigh in?
I'm feeling the pressures. So I don't know that I want to weigh in a whole lot, but definitely feeling the staffing shortage, and recruitment has been very difficult over the summer. So definitely feeling that part of it. And then just trying to figure out with staff capacity that we currently have, what are ways that we can do the best for our kids.
Yeah. And part of that pressure is the perception during the pandemic that it could all be done online and remotely at any time, and that there's a flexibility to time and space that should be permanently there. And it's hard to run a school in the old-fashioned way that way. So you've got this huge gift of changed expectations on top of those other things. And they've all been introduced to these fabulous animated apps, right? Or a lot of them during the pandemic. And they think, well, like, why aren't we just doing this? Why do we have to be listening to a lecture? What is happening? So that's another part of it.
And I love how you frame it as an opportunity and fabulous. I'm not seeing us prepared to take advantage in some ways. And then I still have kind of the question of how do we do it well? So much of the learning opportunity that we provided through remote learning over COVID was not at the level that we want it to be. And then, so how do we do better is one of my questions. And then how do we keep the relationship piece that we know is so important in teaching and learning as we move to something different?
Right. And yeah, I think, Chris, you'll agree with me. The reason we wanted to have a priority conversation is because that's kind of the mood. You can't do it all. Right. And like my analogy of the shift of ages from agrarian to industrial, from industrial to tech, we're in one of those moments. We're in a cope and organize moment. You have to cope with what you have to deal with, but organize for a different thing. It's kind of like being at war, actually. Cope and organize. Yeah, and it's the priority of what you're organizing right now that we really want to dig into.
And I think I totally agree. Yeah, and I think it's just listening to you, Ellen. It's the thing that's in your face is tactile and you can see it, but prioritizing prepping your teachers or getting your system ready for the thing that is coming, whatever's on the horizon, hence the name of our room here. Whatever's on the horizon is the thing that you should be prioritizing, right? You're going to get through today, you're going to get through tomorrow, but if you're not planning and prioritizing prep for that next thing, then it's gonna surprise you, and you're not going to be ready for it. And then doing the right thing for the kids and doing it correctly becomes infinitely more difficult, and you're always playing catch up. And then you're always piling things on top. And then here we are, and we're not getting any better. We're not evolving. We have to evolve. And so, I think it's worth mentioning that we call this the Horizon Room because of that. We need for people to start thinking what's on the horizon and how do we plan for that successfully. It just has to be. Yep.
And I think one of the good things to talk about then in terms of prioritize is what you should not have as a priority first. And so part of the research that we did before we got into this call today is what's going on out there. So sort of sifting through all the news that comes through us, from the AP wire, and also just looking what's going on in the other, anybody who mentions anything happening with education. And there's quite a few articles out there right now about voters rejecting new building initiatives, which is surprising to these superintendents, apparently, who think that the opportunity right now is to build a lot of new buildings. It's not the mood of the country. So like in Maine, 98% of the people rejected a construction project on the voting initiative. This is like almost everybody. South Washington County voters rejected their $462 million referendum for expansion. So this is happening all over the country. And the reason they're doing that really is what we've already talked about, is that shouldn't be a priority. Buildings and places are not a priority post-COVID, which is really interesting. What the parents and voters are saying is we want the distribution of learning. We don't want to give up human teaching once in a while, but let's do this differently. What is that? That's the moment that we're in. So Chris, you want to make any comments on that, or Ellen?
Go ahead, Ellen.
So what comes to mind is that another thing that we learned through COVID is that for especially our younger learners, we are daycare. So having a physical place is still important. So I wonder about how we configure that space. So how do we make better use of the space we have, or change it in a way? So yeah, as you're talking, I'm puzzling more and more and more.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before, where really the ideal scene space that we're envisioning because of the forthcoming logistics technology that would allow individual pathways, but then you're paired up with co-students at precise moments to be intersected with the teacher for that particular teaching human moment, and then diverge again, and then come back woven together again, maybe different kids with you this time as a student, and then a different teacher. I mean, that's logistics. That's what the shipping industry does. But that would mean that your environment, your physical environment, is like a babysitting space. It's a big giant homeroom. And then maybe some satellite meeting spaces like the old classrooms, right? You're still going to need some labs. You're still going to need hands-on stuff. You don't want to forfeit the live human interaction too much, but you want to start thinking about the logic of the coming together. Like, why are we together again? Is it just to hang out? If you have a situation where they're expecting you to be the caretaker all day, every day, which is true all across America, we know this. They're still expecting personalization, right? They want what's exactly perfect for their kid, right? Or they're running behind in math, but they don't want the kid to get Fs all the time. They want them to get a SWAT team. My kid gets special, blah, blah, blah for this. And that's also a logistics thing. Are you noticing that a little bit, Ellen, like the personalization impetus?
Definitely. I feel that there's definitely that push of families want what's best for their kid, which may not be the block kind of teaching that we're currently doing. I heard it discussed as cells to bells, or bells to cells, which was, I didn't really like that analogy, but I can appreciate it, I guess. So it really is what you just said. It's about how do we prioritize the relationships, the interactions that are important, but personalize for our students. And so how do we take advantage of the technology in a way that helps that move forward? So you had mentioned prep and organize prepare and organize. And I guess,
Yeah,
So
I said cope and organize.
oh, okay. So as
Oh.
you're thinking that through, so what are you seeing as the first step? What are you seeing as that first piece to prioritize?
I think because you have a lack of teachers and you're usually losing students because of the lack of personalization. I think you have to address structure. And the only way to address structure is the model architecture of all your tech. So in other words, what can you distribute automagically for learning? Don't give up the human teaching because that's your brand, right? But a lot of what teachers have done for the last 3 years and even prior to that is they have been the doorway through which the learning is distributed, okay? And the actual learning. Then during the pandemic, they did a lot more. They added digital stuff on top. And then they pushed that out, like, here's your login for this, and here's that, and da, 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 da. And some of that, then the student just worked through their own module, or they opened the PDF and did the reading, right? Like just like homework in a digital form. But the number one thing in terms of the ability to organize away from that teacher centricity is to pull up your curriculum map. Like we had when we had textbook adoptions. So all sixth graders going to use this, or everybody's going to use this one thing, right? We kind of threw that out the window, and then the power of the individual teacher went way up, right? Like everything happening in there was completely that person's decision, with few exceptions, right? But if you have all your distribution through a human, you've just created a bottleneck. But if you back up and go, how am I coping with the lack of human teachers so I can unburden them? And one of the things really is taking away from them some of that and having them understand that their most precious asset is their humanity, not their ability to send out email, right? That there should be some sort of auto distribution. Everybody's going to study this now. And then the teacher's flanking that. She still has moments when she's teaching, like as in I'm leading the group discussion, or I'm doing a lecture, or we're doing a hands-on project together. But all the other things that you want a kid to do during math is like, do your worksheets now. That's not actively teaching, it's just sort of supervising, right? Why is that all being hand done by the teacher, either in your learning management system or whatever? So in other words, think about how much work in the distribution and management of the back and forth goes on between the teacher and the student. And to the degree that that can be alleviated and pulled away equals how many teachers you need and how much personalization can actually be done. Because now you're leaning on technology to do something for you. And that's the heavy weight that's currently on teachers all across the country. It's a lack of logistics. Does that make sense,
Yeah.
Ellen?
It makes perfect sense in my head. It doesn't make sense in trying to shift the system. It makes sense in trying to shift the system. That's where I have that gap. How do we make that happen? So so that's my big question.
So
Okay.
I've got a thought as well. I mean, just sort of to tag on to what Lonnie was describing. What I go to is instances that I've seen of a slight mindset shift where we're in a classroom that has 35 kids in an elementary, for example, and you're trying to get every one of those kids to read, and it's just you, and you may not have an assistant in there with you. And your job is to make sure that every one of those kids gets to grade level, right? And they get the grade level instruction, they get the guaranteed and viable curriculum. And what are you going to do? The only way that you can actually do that is to organize the activity and the movement of those learners so that they get as much of that personalized experience as they possibly can. And you do that, right? Everybody has seen those things artfully done. However, we've also seen teachers try to do that and be unsuccessful. And mainly it's because they're stuck in an sort of an older way of thinking about things. They're stuck in, I have to be one person speaking to all of these people and everybody's going to move along at the same time. That just doesn't work. And so if I'm thinking about, as I listen and think about what it is that you're struggling with, Ellen, and many others are, sometimes it's along with that organization as a mindset shift away from the old things and let go, just let go. And that's one of the hardest things to get people to do, is to let go. And sometimes it requires a jolt, right? Sometimes you have to be jolted into doing something different and then brought along, take some risks, make it okay to take risks. And we're going to build something new.
Yeah, and I think what I want to offer more practically is, because you're asking, Ellen, what do I do? Like, give me the simple stuff. Number one, you need an inventory of all your digital assets. And an asset to me is sort of, there's layers of assets. There's, your Office suite. It's either Google or it's Microsoft. It's your database structure and your rostering. But above that are all the digital things, and the lowest value digital things for learning are like documents, a video, the things that actually provide inside themselves, things like pre-test for the Lexile level of the students reading, and then automatically array them into their little library, a set of books, and report into the teacher. Those things can execute on core curriculum as well as supplemental. So what you're doing right now is you're taking inventory of what you have and then make a grid. What do I have for math for first grade, language for first grade, da, 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 da. Here's my subjects. What do I have to execute with in each category? Now you're going to have a lot of holes. Some companies are going to try to sell you everything, and none of them are good at everything. It's just to be honest. And having a million pieces of software is also not the answer, right? So you kind of start out where you can. This is a coping mechanism. The cope you want to think with is, what's my inventory and what big holes can I start to fill now? Because every big hole you fill, like your core in math or language, being auto distributed and auto managed, and the teacher putting in the live interaction around that, relief for the teacher, personalization for the individual student, ups the impact on the parents' willingness to continue having their child in your school. Teacher fights you on it initially and then grows to love it and depend on it and starts being creative about all the things that go around it. So there's more human interaction that's very precise for like each little cohort of kids moving along. But you start there. Like, what do I have and how am I building my digital house? Each notch I need, each little bucket. I need this for algebra. I need this over here for, maybe some extracurricular like language learning, foreign language, or whatever it is. If you can start to envision that you have this grid, then the next stage would be, let's do some practical planning around week one, what gets distributed, and then what is the teacher doing? Okay, so it used to be like the teacher's going to execute the lesson and then attachment, right? Here's all the stuff you're supposed to read, kid, and the worksheets, and then I'm going to give you a quiz, right? Let's go the other way around. Here's the path I'm telling you to go on. And when you hit this particular point, then we're going to get together. Or you can keep all 30 kids together in a class, it's fine. But, they're all going to have to do these things anyway. What the teacher needs to be doing is helping them individually, and then having that teaching moment. What's the teaching moment? Well, we learned from the pandemic, it's not an hour-long lecture for 7-year-olds. It never was. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that so far, Ellen? Is that helping a little bit?
It does. So where where would you start? So you've talked about the teacher role, you've talked about the curriculum role and digitizing it. Would you start at one of those? Would you start at the leadership level? Do you start where your leaders are and help them visualize this so they know where they're heading? So that's
I would start with leadership and a poll of the teachers being digital versus digitized. Digital has magic in it, right? Like it's automatically distributing things. It's following the student. It's automatic. So you're done with this module. Are you ready for the next module? Okay, good. Some of it will check with the teacher. Are you ready to release this module or not? Right. Other ones are like they're little worlds. And you can go exploring around there and read just slightly above your reading level and slightly below your reading level. Your library is guided by your teacher's settings. Some of the programs out there do things like they teach math with no words, like mind research, right? So, you don't even have to worry about language issues. The kids in there, they're playing with a little penguin and moving the little blocks around and figuring out how fractions work all by themselves and being challenged. The teacher's only tagged into the software when needed. So I think the question is, and I think you mentioned this a long time ago when I was talking with you, and that is, the question is an identity issue for the teacher. How much lift are they doing? And what they will always agree with is the distribution and then ingestion again of the students' feedback, essays, tests to be graded, etc., is a heavy load because it cuts right into the actual teaching. So if you have to plan the lesson, find all the materials, but then most importantly, do all the distribution back and forth. Okay, this kid got this. So we give all 30 kids the same thing, but then these 5 needed something additional. And these 16 just pelted me with different questions, right? The distribution and response is the area that as management, you should prioritize handling. And the way that you're answering that is provide higher value software, which is not a PDF and a loose link floating around in the place. It's the stuff that's been crafted to execute on user interface where the eyeballs go. Now they go here. Now they do this lesson. Oh, you flunked out of that one. Here's a different angle on the same lesson automatically distributed to you as a child, as a student. That's what I'm talking about. So it's not digitizing the way teaching's been. It's a new world. Because once you get to this new world, the relief for the teacher on their biggest burden, which is distribution and then ingestion and answering all the questions, is relieved. But they will think that it's taking over their job. Does that make sense?
I can, if I could add to that also, Lonnie, I think Ellen, you're right. We go with the vision of here's where we want to go. But as we're talking about, as you jump into that inventory line, you are taking stock of what you have, but you're layering that up against where it is that you want to go. And if the vision is for we're taking weight off of teachers and we're maximizing humans, then do the resources actually help you do that, or are they hindering you? We shared some diagrams at one point that showed sort of the progression of sophistication of digital resources, right? And so it went from the digital document all the way up to the higher level courseware. And the conversations that we had with partners were about getting to that top end and making sure that all of the resources, as you're vetting them, are they actually taking some of the weight off? Or are you still down in the creation stage where the teachers are doing all the work of curating? And so that's a lens then, as you're taking inventory of digital assets, that's curricular resources, right? Instructional materials plus the hardware. And that's a different conversation in itself. But what we're talking about is that's like the second step. Do we have the stuff necessary to go achieve that vision? And if not, then what's our plan for getting that and then implement? So if you're thinking of steps, definitely go with the vision because we need to know where we're going, but let's immediately start taking stock of assets. And that's a finite task, but it's an important one.
Yeah, I think one of the things you should also know, Ellen, that's kind of a great thing to know in moving to digital rather than digitized and analog, right? Is that when you move to digital, most of the way the software is built is it's not providing you one single lesson Carnegie unit length long. So you log into such and such English, or literacy software. It's not going to give you just 30 minutes of doodling around for the student. And then maybe the teacher's supposed to step in and do something else. It's going to give you a week, usually. So the way that planning gets done is a plan for a week across each of the blocks you're going to have. If you're a 5-day-a-week school, you go week 1 lesson, and the software that's supposed to be being used, if it's one piece or it's 2 different things you're going to log into with instructions, are set. And then the teacher just builds out, what am I going to do? So they have to go look at it and go, what's happening in here? Oh, okay, good. We're teaching that, and that's going to hit these standards. Okay, good. But I don't really quite like the way it does this. Doesn't quite hit the standard right on the head for me. So I'm going to also do this little activity when we're physically together. Okay. So she does a little plan for those. This is the same as we used to do in the textbook days. The textbooks was a lot of reading. So the kids who were great readers did really well in school. Now we're just replacing the textbook with software that's doing the distribution to the eyeballs and the manipulations that the kids get to do. And then the teachers around that, remember how teachers, here's a textbook, they used to just get the video and get the activities around that, blah, blah, blah. So that's really all the teachers doing now. So it's that sequencing by week, which is not as hard as sequencing every single day. And then the students like, do your thing, and then I'll interject my stuff in during the day. So we have this human interaction going. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Yeah, there's just, it's not a turnkey process, right? So there's a lot of work to be done before we say jump.
Yeah, it's a cope right now.
Very true. And what I'm thinking about is the 3 pressures that we even have listed on the screen. If you're thinking of priorities, then one priority is STEM student attrition, right? One priority is take stock of your system and think through how are you actually adding structural change versus tactical things that are strategic. And then how do we maximize humans? That should be a priority, because either you have too many or too few, and you're going to have to figure that out. You're also going to have to figure out student attrition. The way that you figure out student attrition is to start thinking about your structure. Why are they leaving? And how do we modify our structures so that we can personalize? And the way that we're going to be able to do that is to take stock of our instructional materials and our digital assets so that we can actually maximize the humans, because all of these things are tied together, right? The system overload, they're all tied together. And so these are the priorities. Those are the things that are going to make or break some folks.
Yeah, and Ellen, I think the thing that you're struggling with is you might be in a situation where you don't have a viable curriculum map. You've got maybe pacing guides. So some of our really good friends, like at St. Vrain out in Denver, Colorado area, one of their most prideful points for them is that they built a viable curriculum map, which means they know every single day worth of lesson across every subject, every grade that's going to go on. It's done. That is a scatter map in most schools. For you to find out as a superintendent, Ellen, you have to go down into the classroom and talk to the individual teacher. And she may not even know what next week's lessons are. She might be going week by week to taking a, eyeball in the pacing guide and then going, oh yeah, I got to get that done. Right. And doing it over the weekend. So in other words, in order to build your future, you have to start saying to yourself, I got to build a structure, and it's not a brick and mortar building. what you're building is a digital sphere, right? Like it's a new universe that can be navigable through different layers of software, different subjects and all that other stuff. You're building a viable curriculum map. And once you have that done, and it's anchored by, Scholastic and Illuminate Education and IXL Learning and Edmentum and Edgenuity and Mind Research. And there's just tons of companies out there that do this. A lot of them have a lot of free stuff. But once you get this done, then the art and ingenuity of the teachers to fully customize around that, like pull this kid out of this one that's on the roadmap, stick him over here because he needs this, okay? They still have that creative freedom, but you've moved them into the virtual world. It's not a physical world anymore. It's a hybrid. But you haven't necessarily built your virtual structure. Does that make sense? I keep saying that. I'm bored of myself saying that.
It's your interrupter.
It definitely makes sense. Again, it's just so where do you start? So yeah.
So what I'm mindful of is some of the work that we've done with some other partners where we were able to create the blueprint for how do you start this stuff, right? And a number of people do it and some do it by themselves. But the really helpful part of something like that is that then you have a document that you're going step by step on, and you just follow the steps, and it gets you to a place. And of course, there's bumps in the road, but having that blueprint and having the plan for how to move forward is always the key. Otherwise, we're gonna maintain this sort of theoretical sort of place, and that becomes frustrating. And as you, I'm sure, well know, so having that blueprint is a key. We have about 20 minutes left of today's conversation, and we're going to be digging into some of that in some of our other sessions. But that's definitely a larger conversation and work that has to be done.
Yeah, and I will say that in terms of like the prioritization, right? That building your virtual building, so to speak, your viable curriculum map. If you can see it in your mind, it maybe looks like a multi-dimensional spreadsheet. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, crossing that as, math, language, health, blah, 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 blah. And you navigate around and through that as a teacher and as a student. But it can also be very analog. If your systems all went down, you have spreadsheets to back you up. This is the standard we're hitting. This is the software we're supposed to be using, but everybody's machines are down. So today we're going to be doing this, right? So there's no downside, but it's definitely a priority right now based on all of the perfect storm we're seeing, which has only one upside to it, and that is that there's plenty of money in the market. The federal government has some $147 billion it needs to spend. So it's all about ask for it and get your share, because it's out there to be had. It's just so much money. It's unbelievable. But in the meantime, a lot of other problems. So Chris, I think you want to take us in another direction, maybe?
No, I think we're heading in that direction. I was thinking that we could share some of the data that we have, and some of it is things that we've all seen before, but it definitely lends itself to where we're headed with these conversations. And this is stuff that we've collected through research and things that we've scanned the horizon for and the marketplace, and this particular number becomes super scary, right? These opt-outers, yikes. I was reading an article recently about rural districts in resort areas, and these resort areas are actually picking up kids, and there are places in Montana that are booming now, right? And so these beautiful vistas are getting plowed under, and they're putting in homes. And the schools are now already at capacity, and they're building more homes. And so they almost have the flip-flop of things, because now they're going to have a bunch of new kids, and what are they going to do with them, right? And people are moving geographically along ideological lines or for whatever reason. And now all of a sudden we've got this weird disequilibrium in the marketplace and in education in general. And it's great, right? I mean, it's a fantastic catalyst because we know that good positive change is going to happen. But this is a scary thing. The opt-outers, as you're tackling student attrition, where are they going? They are going to those alternatives. The homeschool numbers are gigantic, right? Any of that stuff. I mean, this graphic here talks about two options, right? We're not bipolar anymore. We're not on campus or online. It isn't that. We have to have something different, and that 15% is only going to grow until we can figure that out. So prioritization of figuring out what your structure is going to be, make a plan for that, and then start knocking it down. Let's go get it. And there's plenty of partners around, partner districts to help out. St. Vrain is one that we mentioned before. Super happy to collaborate. Those guys are awesome. And there's many others out there that we know and can connect folks with. So the other thing that I was mindful of is that losing money, and everybody's mindful of that, right? Less kids equals less money, and less money equals closing schools and or teacher attrition. And that's another strange thing, but guess what? It points back to all of those things that we talked about before at the top of this hour. And if you are losing kids, you're losing kids for a reason, and you can help fix that. How do you
Unless
adapt?
it's federal money, which most of the
Right.
federal money doesn't depend on seat time.
Right.
Unless it's title money, right? But the STEM money doesn't.
Yeah. But these are scary numbers, right? California below 6 million.
Yeah.
Yikes. Holy cow. What's going on? And that's nuts. So those guys are going to have to streamline, right? There's no option. They have to change. Those systems have to change, and getting them there is part of our work, right?
Yeah, I think I started a trend. I left, and now I live in Arkansas. And now everyone wants to leave. So
everyone wants to move to Arkansas.
I started that trend.
Good. Yeah. Thanks, LeiLani. We all appreciate that. This was another interesting one, and some of you on the call have seen this before, but this is remarkable, right? Because we have people shopping in different ways, and we have parents that are shopping for digital learning objects, and that's fascinating to me because that points to a need and an interest in doing something different, and we're either paying attention to that as educators and modifying our system to make sure that we're meeting those needs, or we're going to ignore it and say, oh yeah, what do they know? Let them buy the education apps, except that's going to mean they're going to stay over there. And yes, we do have people who have moved because of back to school, of in-person schooling. However, we have great data right here that shows us that market, that software market, is increasing, and it's increasing at a pretty serious clip. So,
yeah, and then what this makes me think about with regards to what Ellen mentioned is a really interesting point, and that is the fact that, she's got parents, a lot of schools have this, where the school, because both parents work, is the babysitter, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that those parents want traditional, everybody when the bell rings goes to the next classroom, traditional environment, right? They're part of this consumer purchasing pattern. Usually they are the grandparents, what they want is really good learning, which in my mind, at least from all the data that we've looked at, is sort of this weird world of online education combined with this physicality, right? I'm here in my homeroom on the campus, and so my parents can both work, but I might as well be a homeschooler. You're just overseeing me, and I can come to you and ask some questions, right? So this is kind of why we're talking about this straight to consumer, right? Because this is real. This is a market disintermediation thing, and very little of it has live teaching. It is mostly, if it even has chat bots, it's a digital AI trying to answer your questions, right, Chris?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And we've even seen this in a lot of our alternative schools, right? Because they're using that, they're leveraging that deep courseware so that the students who might be on campus are actually getting that really rich experience, even though they don't have a human with them the whole time. And that's awesome, right? That kind of experience translates directly into the home, because then some of those kids are like, oh yeah, no thanks. I think I won't come to the building. I'm just going to stay here and do the same sort of thing. So that's fantastic. It's also something to be mindful of, right? We talked about the inventory. Here you go. Let's dig into that a little bit more for sure. Digital curriculum. The other one that I thought was interesting here and connected to our topic is that the models are not keeping up, right? We've got a bunch of sort of quasi-traditional models in the schools, and they're just not keeping up with what the need is. They just aren't. And,
Okay,
and
so
for it, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just want to be bold and say, okay, so priority one that we already talked about was inventory and your viable curriculum map. Start building your digital house, okay? Because until you do that, those other issues of can't get the teachers, students are still leaving, you'll never solve them, right? Because you're still in an old-fashioned thing. So I would say the second one is actually defining what your model is going to be, which is what you're talking about right now, Chris.
Yep.
Is a priority to say, stick a stake in the ground and say, I'm going towards X, right? This is how I'm going to be physically laid out, alongside what's happening with us digitally. So I would say that would be number two. Chris, did I lose you?
No, sorry. I had a pest here in my room.
I saw you going like this. And I was
I
like,
know. I was waving at you.
What's happening? Okay.
Yep.
It's okay to go crazy too. It's okay.
Very, very distracting. Very distracting. Yep. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Totally. Yep. And the models, right? Any of these higher efficacy models are going to rely on all that technology. You've got to have that stuff lined up and ready to go, because otherwise you can't get there. You're going to be stuck. Yep. Yeah. This was another interesting one. So pressures that were cited by educators. This is our 2021 survey information. And some folks have seen this, but that time and space management, it shows up in both the teacher and administrator points, and that's significant. And that's 2021. We've already surpassed that number, and our survey reports aren't published yet, but we're starting to see some trends in those that are going to be, they're going to be impactful, and they're going to point to all the things that we're saying in terms of priorities today. Time management, what are you going to do when you have fewer people in the building? Yeah, it's time to streamline, time to go with a different model, time to do something different for sure. Yep.
Okay. All right. So just those two point back to what we said is priority number one. Really make sure you're establishing your digital house, which your whole viable digital curriculum map. Like, what does that look like? Because if you've allowed as an organization to let everything drop into the classroom farm of teachers, you don't have centralized control. You can't truly execute and distribute in a uniform way. You've just lost all operational continuity. So that really should be priority one. And then priority two is defining your physical space. And then I'd like to say that in addition to what you're showing right here, Chris, another major point was lost learning. This was like number 3 for the teachers, right? I don't know why the administrators didn't really cite it, but they didn't in the national survey. So that is a function actually of your third priority, right? Overachievement against what your expectations are, which is going to require you to do note 1 and 2, right? The first and second priority, so that you're acceptable in the present reality post-COVID of what people want, given that they're all shopping online and they're expecting, quality software, and they want their human interaction discreetly done well, right? Like if like today, most people realize that, if we're going to get together, let's have a purpose. I'm not just going to come over to your house at any time, just hang out, right? We're probably going to have, let's plan a dinner party, but or if we're going to have a meeting in business, what's the purpose of the meeting? Otherwise, I'm not coming, right? So I've got stuff to do in my job, so there better be a reason for us to be together. So education is sort of getting edged out of that manufacturing model because of those changed mental maps people have about how they want time to be, right? So that third one, which is really, what teachers are doing. I'm glad you're showing this one, Chris.
Yep.
Is part of that, right? So go ahead.
No, go for it. Yeah. No,
Well,
I was adding to it.
That ability to personalize for the individual student is largely been left on top of the teacher, but without taking anything away. So number 1 and 2 of priorities we had, which was, your digital viable structure, your new building, digital universe, and your physical change. If you don't do that, you can't do any of the other priorities, which would be how really the personalization and the unburdening of your teachers. Like, how do you got to give some new structure to them so that they can give something up. Because what you're just showing here right now is phenomenal. Like, anybody spending over 30 hours a week on just hunting around on the internet and finding things and then doing back and forth email and answering questions back and forth. I mean, that's a crazy amount of work because it really, it is some human interaction, but it's taking away from what most teachers say is really human teaching. It's like, you're kind of talking to people and you're exchanging knowledge, ideas, and all that other kind of stuff.
That's a quarter. That's a quarter of your people, right?
Yeah.
That's a quarter of your staff that's doing that. And how many kids, if you multiply that by 30 kids in every classroom, yikes. Wow.
Yeah. That's a big one.
And teachers responding. So this was the other part, in a connected way. The thing that I feel is interesting, that bullet number 4, change schedules, different time slots, weekly alternating structures, otherwise different use of time. That's fascinating to me, because that means that what we're talking about in terms of those structural changes, that's that, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing.
This is an interesting thing.
It is, and we have to start biting that one off. How do we establish that?
Yeah, well, we only have a couple of minutes left. I'm just noticing. I want Ellen did we lose Ellen? I think we lost Ellen. But I kind of want to just go over again what we were just talking about with regards to the priorities. Like, what do you need to do right now? Because as a school, we know what they're doing. They're responding to these teachers' issues, right? Or teachers are trying to respond to similar things to what you're talking about right here. But how are they responding to these time and space issues? How are they handling a myriad of other things that are hitting them all at once, while trying to actually get out of this perfect storm? So when we talk about priorities, I think we boil it all down to having a viable curriculum map, digital, not digitized, with an aim towards distribution. And 2, defining your physical model. And I think we said 3 is towards real personalization and the use of your human teachers. How do you do that? And there are some practical steps in that, right? Mm-hmm. And one of those practical steps is actually having those conversations with your human teachers. What do you think your job is?
Right.
What is your job really? Because I don't think enough people have that conversation. They just keep piling on more work. Like, here's some more work for you. Good luck.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So those are great conversations. I think that's for sure where we're headed. And this is the first time that we're doing this, and we're gonna have these every other week. And next week we're talking about devolution. Wow. And the teacher shortage, that's big. Those are big words. Structural shifts. What are you going to start today to avoid that catastrophic system failure? That's going to be a deep topic. We've got some folks that I've spoken to this week, in fact, that are interested in joining that conversation. So all of you listening out there, make sure that you register for those. All of the things are linked from our Learning Council website. So make sure that you hit over there and see what the coming topics are going to be.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to be talking about a couple of the newest ideas that I've heard about what to do about this teacher shortage, which are
Nice.
very interesting. So you have to join us to hear those.
Fantastic. We're always learning and we're always listening. So great. Thanks, Lonnie, for joining us today, and thank you to Ellen Perconti. I know that she had to dip out, but thanks to everybody else listening. And we're going to sign off from the Horizon Room right now, and we'll join you on the 24th.